Well, a stunning new poll making headlines this week over news that for the first time in 40 years, more Americans now believe that the U.S.'s global importance and prestige are on a downward spiral. And there's a growing feeling that America should mind its own business abroad. That's not all. A whopping 70% in the Pew Research Survey believe the U.S. is less respected than it was in the past. Joining us now for more on the impact of this survey at a time when the public remains divided over whether the U.S. should take the lead on the world stage, Fox News contributor and former presidential candidate Herman Cain. Mr. Cain, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you here.
Uma. Thank you. Happy to be with you.
Well, judging by the survey, Americans seem to be less interested in U.S. engagement than at any other time over the last half century. The poll found an all-time low in public support for an active U.S. foreign policy and a growing desire to take a lower profile in the international arena. What do you make of this trend?
3 words: lack of trust. For the last 3 years, this administration and this president in particular have not shown the rest of the world that we can be trusted. Let's just take a look at 3 examples. Israel, they were thrown under the bus at least a couple of times. When you spy on someone that's supposed to be your friend, like Germany, that raises concerns. And the other thing that I believe that attributed to this is the fact that this president decided to pull troops out of Iraq. Regardless of how you feel about us being there, we liberated Iraq. But if you pull out too soon, that void is going to be filled by the same element that we went in there to destroy. So it's lack of trust that I believe that's causing Americans to feel that we are not as well respected, and in fact, we are not.
Well, you know, when the president campaigned for the White House back in 2008, he emphasized a foreign policy strategy that was aimed at rebuilding alliances damaged by the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But this poll is showing that Obama's approval ratings for his handling of foreign policy so far has dropped big time, with a 56% disapproval rating. What's the impact that this is going to have now on the world stage?
Well, I think on the world stage, it's just going to mean that it's going to be more difficult for us to create meaningful relationships with other countries going forward. And it also means that existing relationships are in jeopardy. In 2011, Uma, I visited Israel, and I had the pleasure as a presidential candidate to meet with a deputy prime minister, and we had a very nice conversation. One of the most chilling things that I heard him say during that meeting, which was one-on-one, was he did not know, they didn't know whether or not America would be there for them if they were in a crisis. But he also said they are going to do what they have to do to protect themselves. There is a serious lack of trust of this administration and this president.
Well, let me ask you really quickly, though. Do you think America's skepticism on foreign policy is due in part to other situations like the handling of the crisis in Benghazi, or are people just simply experiencing war fatigue?
I think it's a combination of both. The way that the situation in Benghazi, the way the situation's been handled in Libya and a lot of other places, the way the situation's been handled in Syria, it did not say that this administration had a good grasp of it or that it even had a clear foreign policy. That contributes to it. And then when you add that against all of the uncertainty back here at home that the American people are not only seeing but experiencing in things like Obamacare, which I'm sure that you've covered a lot on your show, it causes the American people to not to be comfortable with the leadership that we have right now.
Well, there's also a growing sense of isolationism that's we're seeing from this poll. And when you were mentioning Obamacare and other domestic issues, do you think the problems of a tough economy here at home is one reason why Americans are fed up with the lack of real progress about solving our domestic challenges? Is that why people are turning away from supporting major foreign policy moves right now?
I think that's part of it, but I think a bigger thing is the disappointment and the deception on the part of this president, as well as the administration and the Democrat leaders, quite frankly, in Washington, D.C. And particularly in one of the studies, that was a Harvard Institute of Politics study also, that showed that even millennials have done a 180 degrees flip-flop. A majority of millennials aged 18 to 29 voted for President Obama, and now a majority of millennials do not like Obamacare. And what's also scary is that they believe he should be removed from office. I had to explain to a 23-year-old young man yesterday on my radio show, it's not as easy as it seems because of Democrat control of the Senate. So I think a lot of the deception that this administration has done on the American people is contributing to this mistrust in terms of our relationship with other countries around the world.
Well, you know, when you were talking about your radio show, I mean, obviously you talk to a lot of people on a regular basis.
Yes.
What happens to a country like ours if a majority of its citizens continues to believe that it no longer is respected in the world? What does that do to the psyche of a nation that has a proud history of being a leader for freedom and a beacon of hope in the world?
I think it damages the psychic, but the encouraging thing that I'm hearing from listeners is that they are waking up to the deception and they are going to exercise their right to change things in 2014. This is what a lot of people are focusing on. There may not be a lot that people can do in the short term to change how America is perceived because of this lack of trust. There's not a lot that the voters can do in the short term to turn this struggling economy around, even though we are continuing to be told that it is doing well. And there's not a lot that people can do in the short term to minimize the negative impact of Obamacare. But people are focusing on the November 2014 elections because they are not stupid. I hear it every day on my radio show.
All right, Herman Cain, always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us today with your insights. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Uma.
Take care.